Thank you.
Okay. Go ahead.
I don't know. Let's see. First, I just wanted to say thank you for everybody who's attending. I see some new names on the list, so thank you guys for joining us. And I guess first, I would like to say thank you to Matt Potter, who organized today's event. So thank you, Matt, for that. Excellent work. So I'll just hand it over to Matt, who would like to say a few things before we start. So thank you, Matt.
Okay, thanks, Heather. Yeah, I just wanted to say a big thank you to you, Barbara, for all the back and forth and helping. This is the first event I've actually organised with Gunma, JALT, so thank you so much for your patience. And I know that we're all looking forward to your presentation. So yeah, thank you very much for your time and yeah, we really appreciate you joining us today.
My pleasure. Okay, so we ready to start?
Sure.
Okay. Well, what I did was this time I suggested to Matt that we just go ahead and collect questions from people, and then I would build a workshop around the questions that we got. And they were really interesting. So it's going to be fun sort of exploring that. But what I'm really interested to know also is what level you're teaching now. Let me open up the chat here. So can all of you see the chat?
Yep.
Okay. Since not everybody can see everybody's recordings, right, or webcams, what level are you teaching? Like right now I'm teaching online only. I'm not teaching any face-to-face. So I'm teaching like young learners, but online. University online only. Okay. How about any others? Slow, you got the whole gamut, huh? Okay. Okay, so. Yeah, Matt, how did you find moving from elementary to university?
It's a huge shock, to be honest. Yeah, it's a big difference, but it's a big challenge, but it's good. Yeah, it's very different.
Yeah, you can certainly, I think you can certainly see what you wish that kindergarten did differently and what got built into it before they get up to you. Okay. Oh, okay. Young learners online, international preschool. All right, so we've got a real range in here. Now, if you are, what we're going to be talking about actually is appropriate even if you're not teaching young learners or if you're teaching private, if you're teaching elementary in a public school. And you might have to help me show how it applies to you. I believe everything applies. And if what we'll be talking about with young learner development and like learning to read and things like that is also really appropriate if you happen to be raising kids or grandkids or nephews and nieces. So there's a lot of overlap. So hopefully you'll find something of value in this. So we had, let me see, why are my slides not moving? There we go. Okay, so the first area with the first question was basically related to reading. And here's the question. So one area that I'd really be interested in is the age that extensive reading can be begun at schools, and some discussion on ER and young learners, how they should be trained to read, how much they should read, and anything connected. And there seems to be some leeriness on the part of Japanese schools regarding a literacy curriculum for young learners. And I have no idea who questions came from. So I think, sometimes the leeriness that you sense in Japanese public schools is not having permission to include literacy in young learner classes at elementary school. I mean, there's a not wanting to encroach on the junior high school curriculum and things like that, but there's also some real restrictions in materials and time limits. So I think there's some real reasons for the leeriness, to be honest. But there's a lot of things that we can do, to work around it, and just to make sure we're all on the same page with extensive reading. Like, I'm not very familiar with extensive reading, to be honest. I come out of a US public school certificate program. And so my first degree was in teaching English to children who spoke English as their first language. And for us, it was sustained silent reading, SSR, which has been around since the 70s. And even before that, it was called free reading. So there isn't much research about extensive reading with young learners. There is a ton with silent, sustained reading. And it really is comparable. The only difference that I can see is the graded readers, which is definitely, EFL. But even in a silent, sustained reading for first language readers, they have what they call like high interest, low level readers. I mean, their children have different, not everybody learns to read at the same pace. And so they have readers that are like limited in language, but high interest stories to make, which function as graded readers. They really are graded readers. So both sides have them. So anyway, the idea behind both of them is just read a lot. And the principle behind it is the more you read, the better you get at it. And research does seem to support the idea that you get, fluency from reading a lot, you increase your vocabulary, all kinds of good things happen. You become better at reading the more you read, right? So are any of you using like a ER program with young learners at the moment, those of you who are teaching young learners? Because there's some reasons why a lot of teachers don't. And one of them is just lack of books. Unless you're at an international school, you really don't have a library that has lots of English language books in it, right? Unless you pay for them out of pocket. Young learner teachers do not get money from their schools to buy books. So everything, and we'll be looking at some resources for getting free reading material or inexpensive reading material for those, because it is a good thing to start doing. Are you doing extensive reading at your universities? Can you tell me about how you find it working at that level? What benefits have you found?
Should we turn on our microphone?
Sure, yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah, we do extensive reading, and we use X reading for that. Students are supposed to read 100,000 words a semester.
Why that number?
I don't know. It was 150, and I'm not sure why it was that, and I'm not sure why it went down.
Do you find a lot of improvement in your students who participate in the program?
I do. Well, they have to, because it's part of their grade. It's about 20% of their grade, so they have to. But I find that almost all of the students do complete the assignment. And yeah, it seems like what I've noticed is their reading speed, because on X reading you can see their speed, and it does seem to improve over the semester or the year.
Okay. I see Philip says in chat that he uses extensive reading for self-directed learning. Could you explain a little bit about what that is? Would you mind turning on your mic and sharing that, or? Oh, okay, no, we can come back to you. I can circle around. Okay. Are you ready? No. Would anybody else like to share what you're doing with extensive reading in your program? Because I mean, what you're doing at university has applications for young learners too. Okay. The more you read, the faster you get at reading. You increase the fluency anyway. The automaticity is often intensive reading, but the fluency improves. So is anybody else using extensive reading besides Philip and Heather?
I can answer that real quick.
Okay, sure.
Yeah, so yeah, we have, I'm a learning advisor at university, and we have something called an effective learning module, where the students can choose to focus on any of the 4 skills. And the students that focus on reading, depending on their level, they will do some extensive reading with great graded readers. So they just kind of read in their free time and just get used to the habit of reading and reflecting on what they read and how much that they understood. Yeah.
And do you notice a lot of improvement from those students who do it on their own?
Yeah, what I think what the students notice the most is areas that they can improve, and they have a better understanding of the different genres of reading, because graded readers are usually stories, and students just kind of think if you can read well in a storybook, then you read a newspaper article versus a magazine. So they begin to understand the different kinds of reading and the different vocabulary associated with that.
Oh, that's a really good point, and that's something that actually is sort of hard baked into most young learner programs, is explicit instruction in different types of reading. Because one of the things that you'll notice is that there's a lot of things taken for granted once students are older, right? Being able to read is one of them. And when you're working with young learners, you can't take it for granted. I mean, I think one of the things that I find really surprising about foreign language instruction around the world, not just Japan, is that for young learners learning literacy in their first language, we provide a lot of explicit instruction of how to read, how to decode, how to figure out a meaning from context. When students start like junior high school first year, they have 2 pages of phonics in the reader, and that's about it. And from then on, it really becomes thrown in the deep end. So one of the things that I mentioned before some of you got here that I'm not an expert on most of this stuff. And so I talk to people who know more than I do. And Leslie Ito, you might know, is one of the teachers in Japan who's doing the most with extensive reading with young learners that I'm aware of. And she's really good at pointing out the difference between working on extensive reading with older learners at university versus the young learners. And the biggest thing here that I think she's pointing out is, first of all, the role of explicit teaching, that both intensive reading and extensive reading have a very important role in young learner education, but also audio, right? The research shows that listening to audio books while you're reading, looking at the book, improves comprehension. It doesn't take away from reading skills at all. It actually helps students understand, and it helps them read better, because a lot of times they don't know how the words sound by looking at them on the page, but they've heard them. So one of the biggest things, like my students love the Oxford Reading Tree. Right? They had no problem with British English. So they, the textbook is American English. I speak American English. The readers are British English speakers, and if they did notice a difference, they didn't think it was a big deal. But their reading level was nowhere near being able to read the books on their own. So they checked out the book and they checked out the CD. And I'll show you our program a little later. And all they had to do was listen and look at the pictures. And after they'd listened for a while, I'd start saying, you know, did you hear any words? Were you able to pick out any words? And the very first thing they were able to isolate in their reading was, oh no! That nothing I ever taught, but it's in so many children's stories that was the first thing that they were able to identify from reading. And they, you know, it has an exclamation point after it on the page and everything. So it was really, really easy for them to find. But they could not have done any sort of at-home reading without audio, right? Or without their parents reading to them. So now, as Leslie also points out, the nice thing is that it's really easy to get kids excited about reading, right? You know, if you've got university students who have to do it for their grade, I would start to argue that it sort of goes against the idea of extensive reading for enjoyment, right? So the nice thing about young learners is that they don't get graded on it. It's not part of the curriculum. It's always something extra. And as a result, it's a chance to introduce them to, you know, they're discovering what kind of books they like at the same time that they're exploring reading, which is a really exciting place to be. Okay, we're going to talk a little bit about the books that you still remember from your own childhood in a bit. And it takes a lot of reading to find what you like. Okay, so this is that shelf was my library. That was the extent of my library. The form on the right was the reading list. So all the students had to do was they could pick up to 3 books, and they had to either read them or listen 3 times, because, you know, books are like 8 pages long. So, you know, maybe 16 pages. So they only had to, you know, sit and listen to it 3 times or go through the pages 3 times with their parents. And for the youngest students, after they finished 11 books, they got to pick a prize from the Gohobi box, right? Something from Daiso. And the older readers had to finish the whole 21 books before they could get their bribe. And after a while, they kept forgetting to pick them out. But at the beginning, you know, it's not something that's comfortable to do, right? To put yourself in a situation where you know you're not going to understand. It's not anybody's idea of a fun time. And so knowing that they were working toward getting some prize was the motivation that they needed just to start. And do feel free to interrupt with questions as we're going through if you've got any. Like, this is very low key, very relaxed, so don't hesitate to interrupt me. I wanted to talk a little bit though about 2 features that are both really important in reading skill for young learners, and automaticity and fluency. And a lot of teachers talk about fluency, but what they're actually talking about is automaticity, which just the fast, accurate, effortless word identification. The difference between sounding out a word and looking at it and knowing the word, right? And that is what best indicates the ability, that best indicates comprehension. Okay, without automaticity, you can't have fluency. But fluency is that plus all of the prosodic characteristics, like the rhythm and intonation, phrasing, you know, both the phrase, the sentence, and testing levels. And so we need to make sure that the students develop both skills. And most teachers have heard of fluency, not so many have heard of automaticity. But both are really important. And it's why we also have intensive reading in classes. Because without learning how to decode words, without learning how sight words, lots and lots of practice with sight words, you don't develop that fast, effortless reading. Okay. Any questions so far? No. Okay, so I told you we're going to talk about books that had an impact on me. Okay, so I still remember in the 5th grade, my teacher read from the Mixed Up Files of Mrs. Basily Frankweiler. Just a little bit every day. It was a read aloud. It's about 2 kids that hide away in the Metropolitan Museum of Art. So they stay after it closes and they hide out overnight. And, in 5th grade, I could read independently, but we still had read alouds and they were fabulous. So that book I ended up reading everything that E.L. Konigsberg ever wrote because I just loved that book. One of the first books I remember reading by myself was Island of the Blue Dolphins. And I'm a California girl, and this was a Native American girl who grew up out on the Channel Islands. She was stranded out there, lived by herself most of her life. So, I could relate to the location, not the lifestyle, but it was just such an adventure. And then in undergraduate school, I was supposed to take several literature courses in order to get my teaching certificate. So I took Gothic literature and young learner, young adult literature. And one of the books then, I still think young adult writers do some of the best work. They can't have lots of violence, they can't have sex. They have to have a good story. They have to keep the attention of, tweens. And so Bridge to Terabithia is a book about death. And I found myself relating to it at a very profound level, even though it's written for young adults or young teens, actually, the preteen age. How about you? Do you have any books that you remember from your childhood?
I used to love Roald Dahl.
Did you have
all
a
of his
favorite?
books.
All of them, okay.
Just the BFG or the Twits, just all of them were so good.
Yeah, they are. And you know what the nice thing about young adult writers, okay, they're perennial, right? Roald Dahl they're old books. And yet, people are reading, the kids are discovering them now.
Yeah.
And they're brand new and they're still timely. How about anybody else? What books did you like growing up?
I really enjoyed the Enid Blyton series.
The Enid Blyton?
Enid Blyton.
Oh, Blyton. Okay, so what are they about?
The Magic Faraway Tree was one of the first that I read. And there was The Secret Seven. They were all adventure stories about children slightly misbehaving, not being bad, but getting up to things that I knew I couldn't get up to. And I just enjoyed that book very much.
Yeah, and I think that's really important to have. That books are a chance for us to live other people's lives. Yeah. Be naughty without getting in trouble. Anybody else? They don't have to be books in English either. But do you have any books that you remember from your childhood as being, like, you still remember them, or authors?
Actually, because I did all my schooling in French, so I remember reading the whole Tintin series, like the originals in French.
Wow.
And that was probably the only stuff that I remember besides reading in class.
Yeah. Okay. The thing is too that if you only read what was available in your class, you wouldn't develop that relationship with books, right? That's where extensive reading really shines, I think, is to give students a chance to try a lot of different styles. To be able to say that I like adventure stories means that you have to read stuff that's not adventure stories. You know, you need a chance to that's one reason that having a library is so expensive. Susan, did you want to speak? I see you raised your hand. Want to tell us about books? Or were you saying hi? Susan? Huh. Okay. If you wanted to speak, feel free to unmute yourself. Otherwise, I'll assume you're saying hi. But yeah, if you're raising a kid in Japan and you want to expose them to that same range of books that you had as a kid in your home country, or if you're raising a kid in Japan and you want to expose them to English books, period, it's an expensive proposition. Because you don't have as, you know, a few libraries have English language sections, but it's very limited in what's available. Okay, and we talked about your favorite books.
Barbara, could I ask you a question?
Yeah, go ahead.
Do you, like, I know that for a lot of people that I talk to I myself too, I prefer a paper book, like a physical book, as opposed to an e-reader. Is it the same for young learners? Do you think that it's better to have the physical copy of the book that they can actually hold and sort of touch and have in their hands?
I think that the research is inconclusive because there hasn't been a generation that has totally grown up that has been on e-readers from the beginning. So there is research that shows that kids already have some rewiring in their brain just from growing up with screens.
Okay.
That they tend to think differently. Whether that's good or bad is probably a moot point because it just is. I suspect that sometimes there's some research bias. Like I noticed in a lot of, for example, sustained silent reading research, the people who are really strong advocates of it find all kinds of benefits. And the researchers who don't think that sustained silent reading is a great idea will somehow find some negative results. And part of the problem, I think, too, is that it's really hard to get teachers to have a control group of students who aren't allowed to read. Right, so it's hard to measure the readers against the non-readers, for example, because nobody wants to have non-readers. And I think that kind of happens with e-reading versus paper. And I know that most of the students that I work with don't really make a distinction. They like the e-readers because children's books make noises and they're kind of like playing games. Right, so a lot of the like books that you get on the iPad for young learners will have picture dictionaries that you touch, or they'll have little activities built in, or they'll have songs, or they'll have animation. So that's really attractive to some kids. When kids become fluent readers, I notice a preference for paper books, but I don't know if that's because of availability. Like not everything is available on an e-reader,
right?
Or if it's a preference for paper. I've read a lot of stuff where people are feeling really vindicated that students are saying that they prefer paper books over digital. And I don't know how much, again, that's sort of wishful thinking on our part, or just personal preference.
Okay.
So yeah, no good answer on that.
So this could be a combination of all sorts of factors that.
Yeah, I think it's a little hard. It's hard to see. I know that there were lots of studies, for example, with media, right? That television and video games at different points in time created all kinds of violence. And then after some time had passed and they did more studies on it, they found, yeah, not so much, because the kids had an easy time distinguishing between real life and fantasy. And they knew that the games were fantasy. So a lot of the kids played Grand Theft Auto and did not go out and steal cars, for example. You know, so I think that there's really, really little research with children.
Okay.
So it's really hard to say. You're probably going to find a lot more research with university students and like preference for paper versus digital textbooks, because that I know that they have been studying. And it seems like price-wise, everybody likes the ebooks, note-taking and being able to flip back and forth. They prefer the paper ones, but nobody wants to pay for the paper ones. So there's no clear answers on that. So are you all familiar with the 5-finger rule? This is how you're taught to help children pick out books. And it doesn't work very well in foreign language, but if you're dealing with children in the first language, basically they pick up a book and they hold up their hand and they read the page, any random page in the book. And if they understand every single word on the page, the book is too easy, which probably makes it really nice for extensive reading, or extensive reading, but they wouldn't get as much benefit of increasing vocabulary or increasing their knowledge of grammar or anything like that. If there's 2 or 3 words on the page that they don't know, it's just about right, because then they get to practice understanding meaning from context, right? If they don't know everything. If there's 4 words on the page, and now, you know, a kid's book doesn't necessarily have all that many words on the page. So if there's 4 words on the page that they don't know, it's a challenge book. So they can still try it if they're really interested. And if there's more than 5 words on the page that they don't know, it's probably too hard. Now, it doesn't mean they shouldn't read that book. Because, for example, when my daughter was in 6th grade, I think, in Japan, so her reading skill, we were bribing her at that point, 5th or 6th grade. She would read 1 chapter in like either Babysitter's Club or, yeah, probably Babysitter's Club. She'd read 1 chapter, which is 3 pages, and she'd get a Pokemon card. Right? So whatever worked, we just wanted her to keep reading. And then Harry Potter came out. Harry Potter is way more than 5 words per page that she didn't understand. But she was so motivated that she read the entire book. And it was a global phenomenon. Her friends were reading the book. Everybody was asking, did you get your copy of Harry Potter yet? And so within like the foreign community in Japan, back when Harry Potter first came out, it was sort of a race for the bilingual kids to get their copies of Harry Potter. And kids that were way too young for that reading had a huge jump in fluency. So motivation can trump reading skill. I mean, it made such an impact on her that when she had to write her admission essays for university, and one of the topics was write about an influential person, she wrote about Harry Potter, that he introduced her to the world of reading. So the finger rule is really valuable when you have kids as a general guideline for picking reading. Especially if you expect them to read it by themselves. But if they have audio, they can handle more than 5 words on the page. And if they're really motivated, you'll also find that they can handle more words on the page. So I don't know if anybody else is old enough to have had kids that learned how to read during the Harry Potter era, but it was quite an interesting experience. Philip, Ryan and Desi, self-determination theory. I'm not familiar with that. Could you share a little bit about it, or would you mind?
I'm sure, yeah. Yeah, just they kind of talk about kind of the basic psychological needs, which are autonomy, relatedness, and competence.
Okay.
And it kind of goes into like learner autonomy. It's connected to learner autonomy. So it seems like, you know, the Harry Potter books,
Right.
you know, it was an autonomous action, even
Uh-huh.
though the books might have been a bit higher level.
Right.
The students had a sense of relatedness to the other you know, peers were reading
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
And you know, as they got better with some scaffolding from parents or other friends, you know, they kind of were able to, you know, be supported with their language competence. So it seems like every need was met, and they were able to, you know, be motivated, because it's a theory of motivation. But
Right.
yes,
Yeah.
it seems like it's really connected.
Okay. Yeah, I'm familiar with that. I hadn't heard that name for it, so that's good to learn something new. But yeah, I think again, motivation cannot be underestimated. But students have to get to the point where they can be motivated about reading. And that's often the role of working on reading skills. So it's a balancing act between the two things. Okay, something, again, there is a relationship to second language learning here, but the average first grader in the US knows about 3,500 or no, about 2,500 to 5,000 words. That gap is between students who are read to at home and students who are not. So students that came from a rich language environment, the parents read to them every night, or they had story time at the library, they got to listen to books on audio, or, you know, in my childhood, we would have a record going around with a little mirror ball that showed as the story was being read, with Disney stories. There were no audiobooks, right? There was not many available to kids. But the gap is one of the things that, you know, obviously none of our learners are coming into class knowing 2,500 words, right? After, you know, this is about 6 years old. So students start phonics instruction in Japan at probably about 8 years old. And then they might know about a tenth of that, 250 words, you know, between 250 and 500. And again, the gap is from students who have a rich language environment around them versus the kids who don't. And that is one of the places that extensive reading can make a huge difference in language instruction, because it gives, but again, it's shared reading often. So each year they add about 3,000 new words, right? So you have to keep adding vocabulary. I would say foreign language instruction, if we're lucky, they probably keep adding about 300 words a year in terms of vocabulary that they can tap and use for literacy. Okay, so that is the place exactly that I think extensive reading can make a difference in young learner classrooms, is increasing the vocabulary students have available to them that isn't learned through classroom exercises. Or more likely what happens is the language that they're learning in class, they see it in the book and something connects, right? So, but either way, it increases the amount of language students have to work with. And a big way that they end up getting the language are read alouds. Okay, so when my students were younger, their favorite book in the whole wide world was Pete the Cat. Anything about Pete the Cat. Now, my junior high school students really they still like Pete the Cat, but they also really like adventure and fantasy. So we're doing a read aloud with Geronimo Stilton, who is a mouse detective, if you're not familiar with him. And again, we're just doing a little bit of reading aloud each week. It'll take us forever to finish the book, but they have very exciting chapter endings. So there's something to look forward to each week. But are you familiar with Pete the Cat already? would you like to listen to a story? Oops, where did my slides? Okay. Everybody likes a story. Let me stop sharing this and go get a, oh, Raymond. My parents didn't so much do read aloud when I was in junior high school but my teachers would. So the English teachers would sometimes have, most read alouds are in elementary school, but my junior high school students, it's nice for them to have a chance to hear the reading. Okay, because they read on their own, but it's different hearing somebody read it because they have to listen at my speed then. So let me go get my link for Pete. And where's my share link? Okay, here we go. Pete the cat. One of the nice things about the pandemic has been that there are more read alouds than ever. Oops. So let me go back and then share my screen again for you. And so if you are doing online, then you can definitely take advantage of all of the books they have for reading aloud. All right. I hope I have this set up right so you can hear. We'll listen to the little ad here at the
Okay,
beginning.
class.
Can you hear
Let's
okay?
begin.
Yes.
Okay, so I'm going to go full screen for you. It's only about a short story.
Pete the cat was walking down the street in his brand new white shoes. Pete loved his white shoes so much, he sang this song. I love my white shoes. 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 Oh, no. Pete stepped in a large pile of strawberries. What color did it turn his shoes?
Mm.
Did Pete cry?
Goodness, no!
He kept walking along and singing his song. I love my red shoes. 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 I love my red. Oh no! Pete stepped in a large pile of blueberries. What color did it turn his shoes?
Blue!
Did Pete cry?
Goodness, no!
He kept walking along and singing his song. I love my blue shoes. 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 I love. Oh no! Pete stepped in a large puddle of mud. What color did it turn his shoes?
Brown!
Did Pete cry?
Goodness, no!
He kept walking along and singing his song. I love my brown shoes. 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 I love my brown. Oh no! Pete stepped in a bucket of water. And all the brown, and all the blue, and all the red were washed away. What color were his shoes again?
White!
But now they were wet. Did Pete cry?
Goodness, no!
He kept walking along and singing his song. I love my wet shoes. 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 I love the moral of Pete's story is, no matter what you step in, keep walking along and singing your song, because it's all good.
Oh, it's so cute.
Yeah, well, if you go to YouTube, I got to go actually turn it off, or else I'm going to start hearing YouTube in the background here. I didn't close it actually. So let me go close it. I just stopped sharing. Yeah, Pete is really cute. And like my students loved it as elementary school students. It was a challenge book, but there's a lot of repetition. So they could understand it even without the recording. Now that they're junior high school, they love it because they understand everything, right? And Pete, the stories are cool enough for older kids. They're not babyish, right? Even though they're written for children. So they really, really like it. So yeah, there are groups of teachers on Facebook who use Google Classroom, and they have put together just libraries of all read-alongs they've recreated the whole library experience in Google Classroom with thumbnails that you can click on to go to books being read aloud on YouTube. So because their students were all at home, so they wanted to give them the same reading choice. And if you're interested, I can hook you up with some of the groups, because they do have some really great resources, even though they're getting into summer now. So yeah, we're going to finish up just about here with reading. But the idea is a lot of repetition, a lot of interesting story. That's one sometimes where in the past, where some graded readers kind of fell short, that they were readable, but they weren't very interesting. Right? They've gotten way, way better. Now, if you're looking to set up a library, making some books available for your students, can you see my slides again? I just realized I'm talking away here and I'm not absolutely sure that everything is visible. Oh, okay, my window. Were you able to see my slides a minute ago?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
I wasn't absolutely sure, sorry about that. Sometimes I share stuff and I change screens and then it stops sharing. There we go. Okay, did any of you belong to the Scholastic Book Club when you were in school?
Yes, I did.
Yeah, so every month or whenever they came out, you get like a catalog, and you got to go home and pick the books you wanted. Well, they still exist, and they are available for teachers in Japan too, or parents. When my daughter was younger, I just basically sent them home with my students' parents. I sent them home with other parents that had, bilingual kids, and used that as my international school order. Better World Books is, they have a bargain bin, and they sell used books, and it's free shipping worldwide. So you can get, there's no point in buying brand new books for a school library if you can get used ones, just because they're used very quickly. Go ahead.
In Japan, you can buy books off Mercari as well, like used books.
Oh, that's a really good one.
Yeah, really. And like, we bought a bunch when my daughter was born, and we've got it like she's only one, but we've got a massive library, and it's only, sometimes it's only a few hundred yen per book. So
yeah,
it's a good option.
yeah. Well, and I think one of the things is, again, in order to discover what kind of books you like, it's important to have a lot of books to choose from. And it feels really wasteful. I think that's one reason I started having books in my classroom library, was just that I was having to buy the books already to make sure my daughter had some choices in her reading. And I felt really wasteful for buying things that, you know, discovering, for example, she really didn't like nonfiction. So I didn't need to have the big nonfiction section. So, but I had students that really did like it. But yeah, okay, so Mercari, I should have added that one. I never even thought about buying books from them. And there's some online bookstores in Japan too. The selection isn't always as good. So Better World Books, I get a lot of Scholastic books, and of course, you know, I didn't include the ELT booksellers because I assume you're already familiar with them. You know, where you can buy the graded readers. So these are basically authentic reading. So books that children would read in their first language. But again, I'm assuming you're already familiar with the graded reader market. If you are looking at apps, there's two really excellent apps for very young learners. Starfall, which a lot of people are familiar with, and then also Read Along by Google, which people are not quite as familiar with. Unfortunately, Read Along only works on Android. So luckily, a lot of Japanese have Samsung, so it works perfectly. The nice thing about it is that it has a reading buddy. And so it listens to the children read the story, and it sort of helps them along if they get stuck on a word. So it's really a nice free, both of them are free apps, both very nice. Lots of online resources now. And I just picked a few of the ones that I really like that have a variety. The apps are more appropriate for the very young learners. But when you have a little bit more fluent kids, there again, the pandemic has been a boom for having access to things online. So like National Geographic Young Explorers has a lot of free magazines. I used to buy these when I would go back to the US and bring them back for my students. And you can access a lot of their back issues for free. Nice thing is they break it down into grade levels. So like kindergarten is their scout level. Tween Tribune, Smithsonian has a great like news website with articles that are geared toward tweens, you know, like 11, 12, before they hit the 13 and become teenagers. And teaching kids news, same thing, it's the news written at kid level. And, you know, there's a fair bit about the Olympics right now, as you can imagine. Khan Academy, I didn't know this until recently. They have a great like ebook section, reading and reading exercises and things. I did not know that. Oxford Owl has, you know, you're familiar with their readers, but they have a lot that is free that for parents and, you know, teachers, but to make it easy for parents to get ebooks for kids to read. Dogo News is geared for English language arts, science, social sciences. So it's, again, geared toward students in the US. And that's what I'm more familiar with. And so I'm sure that there are equally wonderful sites in Europe that I'm just not as familiar with. Nice thing about Dogo is, again, you can select the reading level. So you can select like 900 words, or you can select 1200 words or whatever, and it'll adjust the reading level of the article. And the last one, Into the Book, is from like PBS. They have a great website for very young learners, you know, Between the Lions, the reading lions. And there's lots of finger plays and letter play and games. And this is for older kids, and it's all reading strategies. So it's more intensive reading than extensive, but it's things that kids can do by themselves at home to build up those automaticity skills. Okay, and I'd be happy to send links to any of them, although you can also just find them by searching pretty easily. Okay, and that is the end of reading. Any questions before we take a break? I'm going to give everybody a chance to get a break in between our sessions. We've got 3. The next 2 are shorter. So any questions before I'm going to give you a homework assignment and give you a break.
Barbara, do you think that reading even from a very young age helps? Like what I've read is that even if children can't understand what you're saying, that they haven't developed those language skills, it still helps to build a habit.
Well, I think so. I mean, when did your parents start reading aloud to you?
Too young to remember, I guess. So,
I mean, I think most, I know I shared, you start with like board books with your kid, the kinds that they can eat without hurting themselves, or the bathtub books, or, you know, Pat the Rabbit, where they touch the things on the page. So even if they aren't following entirely, I think there's no downside, right? Yeah. I think the only thing I've ever heard is I have had parents asking me if you can teach a 2-year-old to read. And I have teachers asking me because parents ask them, because they want to have, you know, the edge of starting earlier and younger and getting a step up on everybody. And you can teach a 2-year-old to read. It'll just take you 6 years. If you teach an 8-year-old to read, it'll take you a month.
Okay.
Right? So it's just there's a developmental level that kids have to hit before. I mean, you do have kids that read young, right? I mean, even in first language, you'll have the kids that get really excited about reading, and you know, they're reading at 4 years old or whatever, and you'll have kids that don't start reading until they're 8, 10 years old, even in their first language, and they catch up, right? The kids who start out really early might continue really ahead, and they might just, everybody kind of evens out, and everybody's got different strengths. Some people never become great readers. Some people will always prefer to watch a movie. And you know, that's just the way we're wired, I think. You can develop the skill, and you have to succeed in school, but it may never be something you really enjoy. My husband he had to take the GRE to get into graduate school. And he came back from taking the GRE and he said, "Who the heck knows what an awl is, AWL?" And I said, "I do. It's a lathes to wood as all is to blank." And you know, he had no idea, because he doesn't have it's a tool for working on leather, but he didn't have any idea about the general vocabulary because he didn't read general books in English. He's not a fiction guy. He had to read them in school, and that was pretty much it. Now his political science vocabulary is really advanced in English because that's what he's interested in. That's what he teaches. But you know, again, he's never going to be a huge reader. I would choose a book over a movie any day. There's a personal preference, I think, too. But I don't think there's any downside to starting reading to children at a very young age and letting them interact with books and enjoy the pictures and, you know, tell you their own stories. There's no downside to that. Okay. Any other questions? Okay. Then what I'm going to do is ask you. I'll give you like a 5-minute break. Go use restroom, get some coffee, whatever you want to do. And I want you to come back. You don't have to participate, but if you would like to, we're going to be talking about speaking next. And I want to start with a show and tell. So if you have you can talk about a book if you want, but you can also share an object. And I want you to tell us about an object that means something to you. Maybe something you picked up on a trip or something that was given to you. You don't have to talk long, but we'll use it later in the session. So let's see, it is 3 o'clock exactly. Let's go ahead and I'll turn off the recording for 5 minutes and go get some water or whatever you want to do. And I'll see you back here at 3:05. Okay?
Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, 3:05.
Thanks, Barbara.
Sure.
Thanks, Ira.
Welcome back. Hope you guys had a good break. Did you bring something back to share? Okay. So I want to start with show and tell. And basically, if you brought something back with you, I want you just to show it to us and tell us about it. And it doesn't have to be much, but like, for example, let me see. Talking about traveling, and I have this fish. It's a wooden fish. It's carved, and I got it in Mexico, Cozumel, I think. So on my first trip to Cozumel, it was my souvenir because we went there to go snorkeling. And that's what I miss most with the pandemic, is not being able to travel and go to the beach and get in the water and seeing pretty fish. So that's my show and tell. Does anybody else have one they'd like to share?
I do.
Okay.
So if I go first?
Sure.
Okay, thank you. I have this ring, and I don't know if you can see, but there are 5 stones, 2 shades of blue, 2 purples, and a pink. And this was my great grandmother's ring. And the 5 stones are her 5 children. And my grandmother, who was born in February, is one of the purple stones. So I love this. I just wore it yesterday. And I wear it a lot. It's very special for me because my grandmother passed away last year. So I love this.
That's great. Thank you for sharing that. Does anybody else have something that they want to share?
Okay, I want to share something.
Okay, yeah, Liz.
I'm here now at my daughter's bedroom. She left home. Now she lives in Tokyo. I live in Kumamoto. And she has this big stuffed animal, Kitty-chan. I love it from before, and now that I live in Mexico, so I'm so happy to be here, surrounded with many stuff. So now this is my pillow. My daughter is not with me, but the Kitty-chan is still with me. Yes, it's very old, but I like it.
Oh, what's not to love about Kitty-chan?
Yeah.
I see that. Yeah, we had people bringing in spectators. Okay, so who else wants to share something? And that's really clever, Heather, to put a heart up there. That's a nice way of sharing a response. Okay, do we have the, hey.
Hi, my name is Yui. Okay, and I would like to share our favorite book. This is my daughter.
Oh, hi.
Anna, could you say hello?
Hello.
Hi.
First grader. This is our favorite book.
Yeah.
Do you like Green Eggs and Ham?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So we read this book almost every night, but this is her favorite. We're talking about books, so I would like to share about our favorite books. We like this because I don't know why she likes it. I always ask her like, which book you want to read? Always.
That's it.
This is the first choice, and I like it. I like reading this for her. Because it's kind of rhythm and some words in here. It's fun.
Yeah, they are. It's a really fun book.
It's a fun book. So.
My daughter loved that too. I mean, so that means that book has been around for more than 30 years. And it's evergreen. Children's literature is evergreen.
Yeah.
I mean, have any of you read Goodnight Moon?
Yeah.
That was written in 1948.
This is also her favorite. Goodnight Moon.
And
sorry,
so
I'm in my bedroom, so all the books is nearby my head.
That's where the books live. Yeah, okay. But I mean, Goodnight Moon, 1948. Dr. Seuss, 1950s. And they're still, but I mean, they don't feel like classics. They feel brand new. Right. Okay.
Reading it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else want to share anything? Any share and tell?
I have this tin. It's a kind of kitschy New Zealand cereal tin.
Wheat Bix.
Yeah, and it's got all the like New Zealand icons on it. And actually, my daughter loves this because it's colorful and it's got the pictures, so we can go through and like we practice the vocab, like a kiwi fruit or a rugby ball and stuff. So this is kind of fun for us to kind of play
That
with.
That would be so fun.
Yeah, thanks.
That's awesome. Where did you get it?
Just from the grocery store was doing it. It was when we were on holiday back in NZ.
Oh, okay.
The
So
grocery
not here, grocery store in New Zealand?
In New Zealand, yeah, it was
Okay.
like a promo thing. So I was like, oh, wow, that's cool. So I just picked it up. Yeah.
I know. I mean, how often do you bring the box back with you?
I know, right? Yeah. This is a metal tin, so it's pretty cool. It's
That is.
It's full of tea. We just fill it with tea bags now. So
Yeah, that's really neat. Okay, thank you. Anybody else? Susan, did you want to turn your mic on?
Can I talk?
Yeah, go ahead, please do.
Okay. I don't know whether you can see my book.
Yeah. Okay.
This is the world's best fairy tales. Actually, it's got volume 1 and volume 2, so I got 2, and it's got over like maybe each book have like about like 20 to 30 fairy tales. So it's quite a lot. I received it when I was grade 5 or grade 6. So it's quite an old book. And it's published in 1981. But I like when I moved different places or even different countries, I bought these 2 books because I received from my auntie. And this was my first set of books, English books. Actually, I was from Hong Kong, and most of my books are Chinese one, and these are the first set English ones, and this are my treasure.
Yeah.
And so I like I mean in my old days, like I read it like just bit by bit, and I feel boring or feel sad, I also read some of the fairy tales and then make me happy again. So this is just my treasure.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing your treasure with us. And I think one of the things that you'll notice is that teachers who really love reading tend to have students who end up loving reading. In the same way that teachers who love drama have students who end up loving drama. Or songs. Teachers who think songs and chants are really stupid tend to find students who also think chants and songs are really stupid. So assuming that we're all not just magnets for the kind of students that we get, I think my sense is that teacher attitudes really communicate to students. So if you think that, for example, somebody said like junior high school kids not wanting to read aloud or something, like I just assume my students would enjoy it, and I enjoy it, so they're also enjoying it. Now, could I get students who didn't like it? Absolutely. I mean, there's personal preference involved, but teacher attitude about stuff, if I'm willing to look stupid and dance and sing in class, they don't feel quite as stupid dancing and singing in class. And if they hear me speaking Japanese and really mucking it up, they don't feel nearly as bad speaking English and mucking it up themselves because their English is way better than my Japanese. So I think there's clearly I'm willing to make mistakes, so they're not a big deal, right? So teacher attitude is a big factor. Before we move on, is there anybody else who wants to share anything? No?
I have something to share.
Sure.
When I was about 10 years old, we had a project at school where we had to invent something. And because I like reading very much, I invented a contraption to hold my books, because I would usually read on bed, but my arms would get so sore. So I built a kind of frame with clear plastic that I could keep the books on and then read upside down. I don't have that, unfortunately, but as a sort of nod to it, I have this, which is actually my recipe book holder.
Oh, wow.
So it looks like an easel, but
it does.
Again, I don't actually have a recipe book now, but
you can get the idea.
It holds my books when I'm cooking.
That is so clever.
Yeah.
I'm going to go look for an easel. That's really clever.
It's really, really nice.
Yeah, that is. Thank you. It's very practical too. You're so clever to think of that. Okay. I don't want to leave anybody out if you got something to share, but I also don't want to keep pushing if you don't. Okay. Now, that was an oral presentation. Okay, so a lot of things that we do in class, we ask students, basically they end up being oral presentations. And part of it is, it doesn't have to be a speech that they practice. It can be with a prop. It can be just talking about something that means something to them. And it's easier if you've got a prop, and it's easier if you're talking about something that matters to you, because you have a purpose for communicating, right? You want people to know why something is special to you. So the question I got for this section was about how we can implement a more freely conversational style of learning in the classroom, in public schools. And one of the best ways that we can do that is to make sure that we give our students a reason to speak. Now, free conversation assumes that people have the vocabulary to talk freely, and that doesn't happen in elementary school. So you need to find either topics that are within the students' abilities. I'll show some activities that I've been doing that we just keep building the same vocabulary over and over again so that they can use it freely. But also motivation, finding something that you want to talk about. Like, I've had some really brilliant ideas, I think, of having my students describe some part of Japanese culture. Now, I have never found any Japanese student who is interested in talking about Japanese culture. I find it fascinating. Textbook writers find it fascinating, but my students do not. My daughter, Japanese, fairly native. She went to the US in beginning of junior high school. She couldn't take Japanese language classes until she got to high school, but the Japanese teacher would let her take a test and test out of some of it when she first got there before she started losing her Japanese. Okay, so she took the high school Japanese test and she got everything correct except what is the main religion in Japan and which zodiac year is it. Now, number one, she didn't really understand the whole religion thing. And number two, she didn't know the word zodiac. So she didn't know the Chinese zodiac. And so, but she wouldn't have known anyway, because she really didn't care. The only time you ever pay attention to what year it is at New Year's, when you have new animals out, or the Nengajo have the animal on it. But she was a very typical Japanese kid. She was into anime. She liked manga. Sailor Moon, she could have told you all about Sailor Moon. But Buddhism, Shinto, nah, not so much. So it's asking students to talk about those things wouldn't have gone very well in class because they just aren't interested. You will have kids who are. I mean, so it's really important to find out what your students are interested in. And show and tell is easy because they get to pick the item, right? Okay, again, definition to make sure we're all talking about the same thing. So conversation, talking between two or more people in which thoughts, feelings, and ideas are expressed, questions are asked and answered, or news and information is exchanged. Okay, so when you're just talking, it doesn't count unless you're talking to somebody. Right? So if I just recorded myself talking about my special little fish, it wouldn't be a conversation. But because you were listening and you could ask me questions if you wanted to, it becomes communication, conversation. The reason to communicate doesn't have to be very big. Okay, all I did here was put a screen. This is kindergarten. So students wrote 1, 2, 3, 4. They had identical picture cards. And all they had to do is go number 1, car. Number 2, doll. Number 3, ball. 4, jump rope. And put the cards down in the same order. But because there's a screen between them, they have to communicate. If there was no screen, they just look and see where the card goes and put the card down. Okay, but there's only 4 ways, well, actually really just 3 ways to make information communicative. One is, and they all involve taking out part of the information. So either everybody has a little bit of information and they have to put it together to complete a task, like a jigsaw reading or a jigsaw listening, or each person has half of the information and they have to put it together to complete the task, which would be like an information gap, or transferred, like this one, where one person has all of the information, they tell you and you do something with it to show you understand. That's Simon Says, bingo, this kind of putting down the pictures or being told and drawing a picture. Okay, so we do transfer a lot in young learner classes because students don't have to speak. They can just show their understanding by doing something. But you can also, this is another kind of transfer. And I just drew it out because if we were in a face-to-face workshop, I would have you doing this. But it works great in upper elementary and up in junior high school. If you have the groups, because the kids are already in like HUN, right? They already have groups in the classrooms. So they already have built-in teams. And the first person from each team comes up and looks at the word. Younger learners can look at a picture, but the older kids look at a word. And then there's like 8 words on the list. And the only 2 rules is they can't say the word and they can't use Japanese. So if you played Pictionary, it's really similar. But the difference is that, it's not just drawing pictures. So with beginners, a lot of the words are really concrete. Apple, banana. Those are going to be drawings, right? Because they're faster to draw it than to explain it. And then when you get up to words like running and jumping, they're going to do gestures to show it because that's the fastest way. And then when they get up to junior high school or upper elementary, you end up getting words like sour or sweet. You can't really gesture very easily. You can't really draw it very easily. And so you end up saying, okay, it's like lemons or grapefruit or candy that makes your mouth go, and so hopefully somebody will say sour. So the idea is whatever you can do. And one reason I love the game is it only takes about 5 minutes. It's great at the end of class when people they're just burnt out, ready to move on, and they're tired, or at the beginning of class when you can't get people to focus, to review vocabulary. And it teaches explanation strategies that become really important in conversation, right? So that when students hit a word that they don't know how to say, they can learn how to talk around it rather than just stopping. So they can learn phrases like it's a kind of, it's used for, you find it in the kitchen or whatever. Okay, so the strategies grow with the students' language skills and cognitive levels. So I call it explanatory just because they're allowed to explain it. But if you think of Pictionary, it's really comparable. Another one that if you want to build in a reason to communicate, especially with older kids, this is just 2 sets of objects that are identical. If you're in a large class, you can do it with teams. Like, and the whole point though is that they don't get to see, like one team builds the design, the arrangement. And again, the only rule is they have to be able to explain it in English. So for example, the cup is in the puppet, right? That was not something, when I did the demonstration, the cup was, you know, next to the puppet, or the cup was on the puppet. We never had in, they thought of that one themselves, and it works with a puppet. But again, they had to be able to explain it in English. So the younger kids come up with simpler arrangements because they only know about 4 prepositions. And older kids start getting more tricky because they want to challenge each other. I've done it with engineers, and they will start describing things that it's like 3 centimeters diagonal to very, very specific placement. So activities like this, everybody can adjust to their own level. There's a reason to communicate. If you know, it's a transfer activity, but you can also have people checking, right? They can practice conversation strategies. Like, did you say? Do you mean like this, holding up a demonstration, or in front of, right? So if they can practice conversation strategies while they're playing a game, the idea is that they'll be able to use them in conversation too, which leads to more natural conversation eventually. But at the beginning levels, things are really structured with young learners. So just a duplicate set of whatever you have around the classroom, and they end up looking identical. And because I want to mix skills, even though it was speaking, we worked on writing down, because we want to get the biggest bang out of every activity we can. The other thing that we do sometimes is having them read it and recreate the activity, the design or shape. This is my senior citizen class because I didn't have a picture of kids doing this, but this is simply, who am I? And they wrote down the names of famous people. Some of them were dead, which made for an interesting activity, because then they had to ask, am I alive? Right? But just as a guessing, the biggest thing in conversation is questions, and learning to ask good questions. And so again, rather than just practicing in a vacuum, if the name is on your back, you don't know who you are, you have to ask each other. Okay, so just a little switch up of asking, who am I? Or introductions, especially when a class knows each other. Right? So you can you can ask them to volunteer the names, because I have discovered sometimes that my knowledge of like Japanese pop culture is dated. So I often have them come up with the names, and then we just mix them all up and put them on different people's backs. You'll notice here that we've got structured conversation activities. Okay, so they are practicing conversation skills that's going to lead to more fluent. The automaticity and the fluency for speaking is similar to what we were talking about in reading. And here, this is a bingo game that we just use information about the kids in class. So, you know, find someone whose favorite color is purple. Find someone who likes spaghetti. And they just walk around the classroom and asking the question, you know, is your favorite color blue? And if they get a yes, yes it is, they can cross out that square. And they get to write their own question in the middle. Okay, so bingo, but it's standing up and moving. It's using multiple senses. They're focusing on the activity and they're not focusing on the language practice. So you create a sense of flow when people are just involved in the activity and they feel like they're having fun, as opposed to practicing questions and answers. Oh, so here I had likes chocolate. I forgot to add mine. All right. You've been seeing me recommend activities that are using more than one sense. All right. So if you think about the way things are taught, if you're teaching cooking, you wouldn't have somebody just look at the cookbook, right? You need to mix things up. If you're teaching painting, you need to be mixing paints and putting them on a canvas. You can't just listen to an audiobook about painting. English language uses the whole body, right? We use everything. So we want to teach it in the same way that best suits the subject. So we want to make sure that if our students are speaking, that they're also gesturing or moving, or they're looking at something, whether it's their conversation partner, whether it's a picture they're talking about. If they are looking at something, it'd be nice if they're hearing, like looking at a book and hearing a book at the same time. If they are drawing for younger children is the same sensory connection as writing for older children. So when children draw a picture and tell you a story, it's the same as older students writing a story and reading it to you. So they're using the same, I like to think of it as just a big umbrella that everything hooks under. And the more hooks you have, the better people remember. So the more senses, the better memory. This is in my classroom, even when students can't read right away. So we start using this from the very beginning because in order to have conversation fluency, you have to reach the point where you don't stop talking even if you don't know the word. And you don't just switch to Japanese. So my students practice this a lot. And one of the things we do to practice a lot is like dictation or spelling. So when we do spelling in class, you can ask, speak slower, please. Or could you spell that? How do you spell cat? So everybody gets 100% on the test because they can interrupt, they can ask questions, you can repeat it. The goal is to get it perfect. The goal is not to test how well you know how to spell. So it's spelling, but with a focus on conversation skills. So I'm going to let you have a chance to try that.
Right.
Oh, here we go. I guess it's a video.
How do you spell? R.
Can you hear them? Okay.
I. D.
She's really nice.
E.
Okay, so they're pretty new to it, and she's being super nice and going real slow. Okay, and they would do one more time. So, oops, I'm gonna give you 5 words. So if you got a piece of paper, you're gonna want to unmute yourself unless you think that you're a really super speller. So I'm gonna give you 5 words, just like a regular spelling test. I'm going to say the word, I'm going to use it in a sentence, and I'm going to say the word again. And I'm going to assume that if nobody interrupts me, that you could spell it really easily. Okay? You ready? And if you don't want to participate, it's okay. Number 1, logorrhea. His article suffers from the logorrhea that infects so much academic writing. Logorrhea. Number 2, asceticism. Priests practice asceticism in the practice of worship. Asceticism. You're awfully good spellers if nobody's interrupting me yet. This is a test, by the way.
Is that a capital letter?
No, no capitals. Well, at the beginning of the sentence. Okay. Now, if this was class, you would have to show me your papers. And people start asking and interrupting at that point. Okay. Number 3, soubrette. Suzanne in The Marriage of Figaro is probably the most famous soubrette?
Can I ask one more time, please?
Soubrette. Now, you can also ask, how do you spell it? Right? If you don't need to, that's fine. But I have a feeling that you're just not asking, because I didn't know how to spell these words.
Can you spell it for me, please?
S-O-U-B-R-E-T-T-E.
O-T-T.
Number 4, crustaceology. I always pronounce it wrong. Crustaceology. She is very interested in marine biology, specifically crustaceology. And number 5, get a paw. Get a paw. The other team fell for our get a paw, and it was all over. Okay, you got 100%? Or did you just fail to use conversation strategies? Yeah, now this happens in class too, the first time, and then everybody misses everything. And then when they realize that there's no downside to asking, then they start asking each other. So what I have them do in class, here, I'll give you a chance here. So logorrhea. Logorrhea is diarrhea of the mouth, just in case you weren't familiar with it. Asceticism, which is the abstaining from temptation, usually for religious reasons. Soubrette is the high vocal range of female actresses and singers. Crustaceology is the study of crustaceans like shrimp and crabs. And 5, get a paw. Get a paw is a trap. So I picked ones from the spelling bee. So actually kids had to spell these to win the spelling bee. But the idea is, like, what I do with my junior high school students, for example, is I have them write sentences and then put them in pairs, and they dictate to each other. And they have to have perfect, it's a transfer activity, but they have to have a perfect match when they get done. And so they learn pretty quickly to ask, did you say, could you repeat that? Like, first half, second half. Okay, so what we're doing is practicing things that are going to make conversation better, but in activities. And finally, another really wonderful game is the compliment game. You just say something nice about somebody, and they get to practice saying thank you. So, oh, I love your skirt. Thank you. Or you're always so smiley in class. Thank you. And you're very friendly. You always share your bento with me. Okay, so just learning to say something nice. All right. Is there a question before we move to the last little section of this?
Barbara, sorry, could I ask you about the previous activity? Did you say the students write what, a couple of sentences, and then they just
dictate? They do dictation,
and the partner just writes it.
Right. So the first thing is making sure the sentences are correct that they write. Right. So I get to check the sentences when I walk around the room, because if the sentences aren't correct, then you're just dictating mistakes. Students can't learn to use their internalized knowledge to figure out the parts of the sentence are missing if the parts actually aren't there. Right, so you have to make sure the sentences are correct. But students are always, they just write down sentences from their readings at the first. You know, they don't usually create unique sentences. But the point is learning how to interrupt each other and ask for clarification.
Right.
It's just a really simple way of doing it.
Okay. Okay, thank you. And the students you can just give them any topic that they like, any topic that they're interested in, or
yeah. Usually, like my students will have a notebook that they practice writing in, so they just pick a couple of sentences from that.
Okay, thank you.
But they can also take sentences from their readings.
Okay.
Right, in the textbook. Because the point isn't the content as much as the activity. So this was actually the second part of that question, because it was talking about the focus in elementary school seeming to be on lexical chunks and set phrases and focusing on presentations. And that is the point of elementary school practice, right? We start by learning those chunks and the set phrases so we can use them comfortably, right? That's the automaticity. And you have to learn those chunks somewhere, and it's elementary school. So that by the time they get to university, they've got a lot of things to pull from to create conversation. But in elementary school, they don't have that repertoire. And that's why things sound stilted sometimes, because the most of the free activities happen when you can push students into that motivation zone. Like they want to talk about something enough that they're willing to do it with mistakes or not knowing all the words. But you also, and that develops the fluency, but you also have to focus on the accuracy so that and that's where those lexical chunks come in. So for example, here, we build this up. A big thing with students is learning now in schools is learning how to give your opinion and to support it. And it becomes really, really big by the end of junior high school. So it's great if you can start practicing. And students love talking about their own opinions. I mean, I am my own most fascinating topic, right? What I like, what I don't like, what I want to do. So this is the language we built up. And we just practice it really simply. Okay, so what's better, rice or bread? Now, there's no correct answer here, only opinions. But students will say, one student will say, well, actually, all of my students said bread was better for some reason, because bread is easier to eat in the morning, right? And it has chocolate inside. Okay, so let's try one with you then. What do you think is better, chocolate cake or ice cream? Anybody have an opinion?
Chocolate cake.
Chocolate cake.
Why do you think so?
Because it's delicious.
My favorite.
It's chocolate.
Favorite.
Okay. Yeah, one of my students liked the chocolate cake because ice cream hurt her teeth. And I thought that was a really good reason. Okay. So then we had, I think, watching TV is better than reading a book, or I think reading a book is better than watching TV. Again, very low risk. This is not a debate. These are very low risk activities. Anybody got an opinion?
Reading a book is better.
Okay. Why? Really?
Watching TV is much better.
Why? Why do you think so?
I don't watch TV.
Well, that definitely makes reading a book better, doesn't it? Okay. My student made a distinction that they prefer reading a book if it's manga, or that another one prefers watching anime versus reading manga, right? So they can get very, very specific on their reasons for things or their categories. Okay. What do you think? Which is better? I think hot breakfast is better than a cold breakfast, or a cold breakfast is better than a hot breakfast. Any opinion?
Breakfast is better.
Breakfast.
I'm in winter right now, so definitely warm food.
Hot breakfast. Okay. Yeah, my students all said cold simply because it was faster. They like to sleep in the morning, so they don't want to take time to eat breakfast before they go to school, which is also probably why they liked bread. Okay, now I think taking a picture is better, or I think drawing a picture is better.
I think taking a picture is better than drawing a picture, but I'm terrible at drawing.
Actually, and that's interesting because I say the same thing because I really suck at drawing. My students all chose drawing. So apparently we hit an age where we stop thinking that we're good at stuff. Right. So and then the other one pointed out that they don't have a camera. And they're not allowed to use the smartphone, so they prefer drawing. But again, giving people something fun to talk about, where it is safe to have an opinion, it's an easy way to practice that kind of language. Now, you guys got away really easy by not having to substantiate your reasons, your opinions with any reasons, and not having any questions asked. In class, students do both. Okay, this one was hard. This one got the reaction of, I don't like either, right? We learned a new phrase with this one. So I said, you have to choose one. Which one is the least bad? And they chose cleaning their bedroom. So for what it's worth. Okay, here's another one. Again, what's the world's favorite color? If you had to make a guess, what would you say? What do you think? This is from just u.gov or something. So it's opinion polls from around the world. So what is the world's favorite color?
Red.
Blue.
Blue.
I want to go green.
Okay, I got some
Red.
different choices here. Blue.
Yeah.
Okay. And last survey here. What is the world's favorite animal?
Dogs.
Dog. Elephant.
Dogs are not there.
Dogs.
Elephant.
Okay. Yeah, dog and tiger are really close. So tiger won from Animal Planet. Now, I'm not saying this is an unbiased survey, by the way, okay? Because it doesn't really matter if it's right. The whole point is to give students something to talk about. And they're very easy. You can just do a Google search saying, what is the world's favorite food, for example, or what is the world's favorite? There's lots of these little surveys, pretty easy to find. And the whole point is creating a reason to talk and coming up with opinions and supporting them. Okay. I don't know that I'm going to try doing this one. Let me see. I don't know. Actually, do you want to go watch Ritsuko do 6-second drills, or have you ever seen it? When we talked about practicing, it's a very short video clip if I can go find it. She was the best at getting people to use the whole body to practice language. And it's a great example, if I can find my video here, here we go, we're going to take a break after this too. So it's a great way to get students to repeat a whole lot without feeling like they are doing exercise. So the problem with Zoom is when everything gets covered up at the top. All right.
Okay, ready, go.
Did I share that with sound? Can you hear it? Yeah, okay.
What do you like? What do you like? What do you like? Finish! Okay. One more time. Ready, go. What do you like? What do you like? What do you like? Finish. Very good. Now say it 3 times, clap 3 times, and touch, give a high five to both sides of your neighbors. Ready, go. What do you like? What do you like? What do you like? High five. Hey, finish. All right. Very good. This time, say it 3 times, rub your tummy 3 times, and say finish. Ready, go. What do you like? What do you like? What do you like? Finish. Good. All right. How many times did you say what do you like? Many, many times. Do you think your kids will learn it now? Okay.
So the idea is to get them so involved in doing things while they're practicing that 6 seconds goes really fast. That's why they call them 6-second drills. And the students get a lot of practice. You can all, one of the things my students really enjoy doing is everybody has to stand up, and each person in pairs, they ask 3 questions, answer 3 questions. So it's a total of 6, and then they get to sit down and say finished. And the 2 things I love about the activity is that it's very fast. It really reinforces natural speed and intonation. And the kids end up back in the chairs when they finish speaking. Right? So they're already sitting down when they're done talking. And the race is to do it as fast as you can. Now you can do all kinds of the activities with it, but you can also just do straight practice with question and answer. You have the picture cards on the board that prompt the things that they can ask. You can make it more difficult by saying you can only ask the same question once. You can only ask about the same vocabulary item once. You can make it easier by not putting that rule in there. Okay, and so that is the finish of speaking. And our last little section is assessment. Do you want to take another little 5-minute break and go get some water, or you're, yeah, okay. So it's about 5 to 4. So why don't you come back at 4 and we will finish up the last segment on assessment. Heather, did you have a question?
Okay. No.
Oh, okay. All right, so I'll turn off the recording and I'll see you back in 5 minutes for our last little bit.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay, I'm going to turn the recording back on and we're going to go into the last section. Which is assessment. And it was a really good question, I thought, about the best way to, how do you test people when they don't have very much to test? Right, so, you know, how do you assess speaking when you're dealing with students who can't say very much? It's a challenge, right? And, you know, how to provide constructive feedback without like killing their spirit, making sure that they're still interested in continuing even if they're making mistakes. And again, a definition of assessment. So we're all talking about the same thing. Just principled ways of collecting and using evidence on the quality and the quantity of people's learning. Now, most of you are familiar that there's 2 kinds of assessment. The summative type of assessment is usually at the end of a program, and it's to let stakeholders know that what you're doing is working. There isn't all that much benefit to the students themselves unless it's an entrance exam and they do very well on it. Mostly summative learning shows parents that your classes were worth paying for, you know, if they do well on the Young Learners exam, or to show the school that it's good to keep you on staff because your students are doing well. Students benefit most from formative, and teachers benefit most from formative assessment, I think, because, and that should be ongoing. Like when I'm teaching class, I'm paying attention to how my students are doing, right? If they're speaking, I'm listening to see if they have, if they're still having a problem either with vocabulary, in which case we do a little mini lesson, or if there's a grammar pattern that they just, they're not using it correctly because they haven't learned it yet, right? And there's a difference in, you know, the things that my students know, and I know they know because I taught that, we practiced it, I've heard them do it correctly. If I have expectations for them to be able to use those correctly or accurately or fluently, but things that they haven't learned and they try to use, they get big points for trying. You know, being willing to make a mistake in order to say something that you're interested in saying, I think is really important. But I basically just walk around class with my notebook and I write down things that I observe with the students in class. One of the these are really common activities that teachers use in class for assessing speaking with low-level students. Talking about yourself, right? Or that like show and tell activity that we did. Or, you know, all students learn self-introductions. So that's a natural thing that they should be really comfortable talking about. Or, you know, what did you do last weekend? What are you going to do for your summer holidays? Storytelling, where they are either telling you a story about a picture that they drew, or maybe they're sequencing pictures, or a picture prompt that they talk about. Hopefully with vocabulary that they know how to say. The biggest mistake I see in assessment is teachers assessing students either for language that they haven't learned, or in ways, using a written test to test speaking, for example. Right? A lot of tests are written, and it's not a good, it's testing reading and writing skills. It's not testing speaking skills. Okay. Oral presentations, that was also, the show and tell is very similar to those. Very common in schools now is to, I think my students are doing one, they had to talk about their school, right? So they almost all had the same presentation, but that came out of their textbook. Or I think they're working on about whether school lunch is better than box lunch, right? So again, that either or. And again, pictures help provide vocabulary. Pictures help give students tips about what they can say. And then also using the same activities that they're using for learning as informal assessment. The beauty of using familiar games is that the students are already comfortable with the how they work, right? A lot of times you'll have kids that shine in your class and they don't do well on tests because they aren't familiar with tests, right? There are kids that are really good at test taking, and there are kids that need to learn how to take tests, right? A lot of the kids that went to JUCO are really good at taking tests. And so the kids that didn't have that advantage, if you will, need to be coached on test taking skills, because it is a skill just like reading, writing, speaking, listening, and test taking. So I love using the familiar activities. Everything that we did in the speaking section can be used for assessment. The students don't have to know that they're being tested. In fact, they shouldn't know that they're being tested, because you're not going to use the information you get to penalize them. You're using it to figure out if what you did worked, or if you need to reteach or teach it in a different way. A kindergarten teacher I know who's working online, she makes an online quiz for the kids every week, and the kids take it anonymously. But the information for her is which questions are easy or difficult, right? So she knows what they're all having problems with, or what she did an okay job teaching. And the kids just love taking the quizzes over and over again because they get, higher scores. So they come in with different aliases so they can take the tests again. Okay, so here's a couple of, you don't have to see these perfectly. The whole idea is simply that you come up with your teaching objectives, right? Every teacher learns how to write objectives. What it is the students are going to learn how to do, what you're going to be teaching, the steps they're going to go through, what they're supposed to learn. That can just be flipped over into your assessment. Like, how well did they do the things that were on that becomes a checklist for you. And so you can do it holistically. You can also actually physically make a checklist and give them a score 1 to 5. For example, in speaking, for example, did they make eye contact? Did they ask for clarification? Did they share information? Did they cover whatever information you wanted them to include in that particular conversation, right? Did they show that they were listening, for example? Did they use words like really? I see, right? So you can make the assessment anything that you need to know if students are learning, right? And use it to inform your own teaching. You can have students check. They can do self-assessment. And actually, they're better at this than teachers think they are. Students have a pretty decent idea of how well they're doing on things. So you can ask them, and you could even have the assessment in Japanese if you wanted to for lower level students, but asking them that, how did you think you did? And usually what I do with my students, like for we're doing writing assessment, I'll ask them to identify something that they think they did well and something that they would like to learn how to do, like something that because they ended up writing it in Japanese because they didn't know how to say it in English, for example. And so that it takes a lot of practice still, but students can learn to be pretty effective judges of their own progress. And it's a skill that is really useful as they go up higher in education, right? Become reflective learners. So here's one that I put together for our show and tell. Okay, so if I were going to do this in a class, now I didn't give you any instructions, so I couldn't really grade you on whether you asked for questions or not, because I didn't say make sure you ask for questions at the end. But I could definitely see whether somebody showed their object and they made eye contact, whether they spoke clearly. They answered the question, why did they bring this object? And they shared information about it. And, asking for questions is something I threw in there without knowing what anybody was going to say. But you can do it very simply like this, and you can simply be a check, yes, they did, no, they didn't, or it can be like a circle, great job. I mean, Japanese system, a triangle needs some work. And nobody fails. It's just either needing work or great job. Okay. So any questions about that sort of checklist? That's kind of a first language public school teacher thing, but I think it's really useful in foreign language too. Nope. Okay. If you're teaching online or in class, you can also have students give you feedback during the lesson. Like nobody wants to raise, like even when we were doing spelling in here, you all are really confident in your language skills, but nobody really wanted to interrupt me and say, how do you spell that? Right. So you can ask students to use like finger communication feedback for you. They can just, like, I don't understand. And so that you either need to go check in with them or it's nice online, but I'm going to be using it in my face-to-face classes too, just because it's nice for students to have a chance to let you know if they need help without having to announce to everybody that they're lost. And putting it in terms of that, I can do it by myself, and hey, I can tell somebody else how to do this. Right. So a range from I'm lost to I kind of get it, I can do it, and I can tell somebody else how to do it. I think it's nice to have that constant feedback. I recommend this book. I actually only learned about it recently. And you can find it by searching. It's a free download from British Council. They did a huge project checking foreign language instruction in Europe. And the numbers that they have, like when they asked students to identify their own learning and what they were doing well and how they thought they were doing, it really correlated with their test scores. So it showed me that students actually can do a fair job of identifying their strengths and weaknesses. Not always in the foreign language, right? So we have to keep a balance of what we expect people to do in English and what they can talk about holistically. So that's when it's nice if you've got bilingual teachers or somebody in the class that, if you're in a situation where you've got lots of different languages, that you've got, some people who can help with translation too, so that people aren't limited to talking about only what they can say in the second language. Because I know I sound like an idiot in Japanese after 30 years, right? So if people only know me in Japanese, I sound even less intelligent than I do in English. Okay, so learning tasks and assessment tasks need to be age appropriate insofar as they recycle language while offering opportunities to learn in a way that is intrinsically motivating and cognitively challenging. And I think that that is a really good guideline for, it's also a free download that if you search for it, you can find. I tend to recommend articles and books that are free because no children's teachers have access to university libraries. So I hate it when I go to a plenary and I get a reading list of books that I can't access without buying them. So I try to avoid doing that. So again, that's a great argument for using activities that students are already doing in class as your assessment activities. Because they're already intrinsically motivating, hopefully, if you've done a good job of setting them up. And hopefully they're also cognitively challenging, right? Just beyond what students can do, unless you're working on fluency, which should be easier than what they can do. So, finding a balance between challenge and task. All right, guessing game. This is an assessment activity on question asking. You have 20 questions. What do I have in the box? Now, I'll tell you, when I do this with kids, they start out asking really, really stupid questions. Is it candy? No, and that's using a whole question. Is it a toy? No, also a whole question. So eventually they start learning to ask strategic questions, but it takes a few times of ending the 20 questions without opening the box. Right? If they don't guess what it is, I don't open the box. I'm wasting an item that way. Okay, so you have 20 questions. Can you guess what's in here?
Is it edible?
No, it is not. That's an excellent question. And I do give points in my class for really good questions. That's a good one.
Is it soft?
No, it is not.
Is it made of many parts?
No, it is not.
Can you buy at the supermarket?
No, you can't. But you can buy it.
Is it stationary?
No, it is not.
Can you wear it?
No, you cannot.
Can you read it?
Nope, you cannot.
Is it a toy?
No, it is not.
Is it candy?
Candy?
Don't go there, don't go there. Okay, that's 8.
Okay, I didn't want to use that question.
I didn't count that question.
Okay, thank you.
Is it a furniture?
No, it's not. It fits inside the box.
Oh, that size.
Yep, it's smaller than the box.
Can you read it?
Somebody already asked that question. The answer was no.
Is it something that you could use?
Pardon me?
Is it something that you could use?
It's not useful. It's more decorative.
Is it hard?
Is it hard? Is that the question? Yes, it's hard.
She said, is it art?
Oh, is it art? No, not really. And I answered the other question too.
Is it something you might give as a gift?
Definitely, yes. But that's me. Other people might not agree.
Is it an accessory?
No, it's not.
Is it a card?
No, it's not.
Is it made of plastic?
No, it's not.
Is it made of paper?
No, it's not.
Is it made of glass?
No, it's not. I'll tell you that it is a kind of rock. I'll give you a big
give
hint.
rocks as gifts?
So think about what kind of rock you might give as a gift.
Is it
Is it a fossil?
Yes, it is. It's a fossil. It's ammonite, ammonite. So it's a fossilized shell. And I gave it to my husband as a Father's Day gift. So it was a gift. But he's really into fossils. So, but okay, so yeah. Now I would pick an easier one for students starting out because they don't know the word fossil, right? But the idea though is too that if they don't guess in 20 guesses, you know, it's similar to I Spy, right? But it's good for reinforcing strategic questioning and motivating because you only get to see what's in the box if you guess. So I'll bring it back to the next class if they don't guess. I make sure I put it where they can't reach it in between, right? But yeah, it's really simple. And again, learning to ask questions is one of the most important things kids can learn in English. And learning how to ask good questions unlocks a lot of good stuff later. Okay, another one, I have never. Okay, now you can do it with 5 fingers, or you can do it with 3 fingers. It's a drinking game originally. Never have I ever, right? And if somebody has done it, they have to take a drink or have a shot. Now, but you can do it with fingers, and you know, I have never, because that's a big pattern. So, for example, I have never skydived. I have all 5 fingers. If anybody has skydived, you have to put 1 finger down. See? Okay. Now you can decide if the winner. Now, Joel, would you like to do one? Say, I have never.
I've never bungee jumped.
Neither have I. Okay. Sloan, you want to add one?
Yeah, sorry, do you put your finger down if you have or you haven't?
Yes, if you have. So he has never, so his fingers stay up. But I'm guessing that Joel skydived, so he put 1 finger down. Right? And so the thing is that what you say is something you have done. Or I mean, you haven't done, sorry, something you've never done. If somebody else has done it, they put their finger down. So something you've never done.
I have never eaten fugu, pufferfish.
Okay, so we lost some fingers there. Okay. Heather, do you want to say one?
I have never been to Hokkaido.
Okay, so we would keep going until somebody was no fingers. And now, as a flip of that, obviously, if you want to have somebody who has no fingers down as the winner, the game lasts a really long time. But if you have it where the first person to have all the fingers done, because they've done a lot of things, is the winner, then it goes a lot faster. And people aren't expecting that. Okay, I'm not going to play this recording because I found out it doesn't really work. But I wanted to show you that at a very, very, very basic level. These girls only know what's your name, I'm whatever. And so we just had a game with puppets, like 1, 2, 3, hello, and they bring the puppets out. Hi, what's your name? I'm Kana. Goodbye. And that was the practice because we had, you know, like 30-minute class and they only know a few lines. So we had to have a lot of different ways of practicing it. And they loved the game. They kept making up new names. And so they had to listen because they would have to, you know, like bye Kana or whatever the name was. They had to listen to it. And I could see that it was assessment for me. I could see that they got the language. If you do want to watch it, it's over on my YouTube channel. So I'm pretty easy to find. I think this is brilliant. This is a teacher in Nagoya, if you know Naoko Amano. She's an Osaka chapter, and she uses line with her students' parents. And every day, they just send something.
Crayons, markers, pencil case, crayons, markers, pencil case, 2 crayons, 4 markers, 1 purple pencil case. How many crayons? 2 crayons. How many markers? 4 markers. How many purple pencil cases? 1 purple pencil case.
Okay, so really, I mean, the beauty of this, if you're teaching privately, is that the parents think that you're the best English teacher in the world, right? Because they see their kids doing stuff every day and the parents are responsible for sending it. So you get parent involvement. The parents end up recording the kids. And you can also do it with older kids. You can set up chats where in between classes, I think this also started when everybody was working online. You could ask a question between class, like, you know, show me something round, and you get all these pictures back of round things in the chat. Or with older kids, if you could have any superpower, what would you have? And just the communication between classes to keep a community going. But it's a great way for assessment too. Before we finish up, any other ideas that you can add to this for either assessment or for speaking or for reading? Anything before we say goodbye that you would like to share? Any ideas that it has prompted you to think of that I didn't share?
I have a question about one of the questioning games.
Mm-hmm.
How do you ensure that you get a good sampling, like the 20 question game, for example?
Mm-hmm.
The most competitive students are just going to ask 20 questions.
Well, you have the rule that you can only ask one question.
Okay.
So there's no reason that you can't fix the rules. Like if we play memory games in class too, Shinken Suijaku, some kids are really, really good at it. And they're really fast. And they've got that whole automaticity really down so they can read things fast. And so you set the rule that the person who gets the card can't be the next person. So like if you're doing slap or something where like karuta, and they're racing to touch the card, the person who touches the card is the next person who says what to touch, so that you don't have one kid dominating the game. When we play like Shinken Suijaku or we play concentration, you can only get one pair at a time. You only get one turn, right? So just to make sure everybody gets turns. And with the questioning games, you can either give kids tokens. Yeah, if you have kids that don't speak, you can give them tokens and they have to use up all their tokens. If you have kids that talk too much, you can give them tokens and they only get to speak when they give up the token. So no tokens, no speaking. It's not a perfect system because some kids just cannot help themselves, right? But it helps, it does help. You can also have kids in groups, and the role of the group is to make sure everybody gets a turn. So yeah, those are, I mean, some of the ways that I've tried to make things a little bit more equal in class. I also assign arbitrary points. So if we're playing a game and we've got a team, like they aren't, I don't say that they're arbitrary, but I think a lot of teachers have strategic cheating to make sure that everybody gets a chance to win. And to make sure that losing is very low stakes. That's why like bingo games have 9 squares. And often when we're playing bingo, kids want to go until everybody's had a bingo. So it's really nice if you have really short games. Any other questions or comments or ideas?
I have something I do in my classes, Barbara, which I'm teaching university now, but I think this would work for elementary school kids too. Is that I get my students to have a conversation outside of class and then they record it.
That's brilliant.
And this is actually something I got from the book that you sent me by John Fensler. But yeah, and I get them to upload to this app called Flipgrid, and they upload it, and then once they've had the conversation, so that way I can go into Flipgrid and I can check it, and then I also give them a self-assessment feedback form. So what they do is they go through and first they write what they want to talk about with their partner. So they write the questions, and then they have the conversation, and then they write like a kanso, like a furikairi. And it seems to be like I've only done it for a few weeks so far, but I've had really good feedback from the students. They're sort of saying, oh, you know, like I couldn't react well, and I couldn't use I see or really, so next time I want to do this. So
yeah.
I agree what you said about how that reflective learning is very, very important.
Yeah, and also repetition. Like I mean, a lot of times teachers think that students are going to get bored doing the same thing over and over, and students think they're going to get better. Right. So who was showing us how her daughter loves to read Green Eggs and Ham. It's not like she doesn't know how the story ends. Right. But she enjoys it every single time. And students like, if the activity is fun, or it's slight differences, or, you know, just they like knowing that they're getting better at something. They can see the progress. Yeah, I think I think that would definitely work with young learners, especially if they had parent help.
Yeah, it would be cool if you're teaching young kids, then you could just say to them, hey, do this conversation with your mum or dad, and then upload it. That would work.
Yeah. I think that's a great idea. Anything else? I don't want to keep you guys longer. It's already 4:30. So what I will say finishing up is that I'm very easy to find online. So if you do have other questions or you want to connect, please do feel free. If you want a copy of the slides, let me know. I will upload the recording to YouTube, and there'll be an unlisted link. And what was I going to say also? Matt mentioned John Fanslow's book. And since I work with the group that published the book, if you would be interested in getting a copy to read, it has other activities in it. And it's, you know, not young learners at all, but like there are ideas that are useful. If you might be interested in doing an honest review of it later, then it would be much appreciated. We'd be very happy to give you a copy of the ebook for that. It's a good book.
Can I say about that book, like
Sure.
for anyone who's interested, like it's a really kind of a very different approach to teaching and learning. So I think it's a good read for anyone who is interested in education. So yeah, I recommend that.
Yeah. One thing that's really nice about it is like technology finally caught up with what John wanted to do for teacher training. And so he has videos. They're hosted on a separate website, but there's videos showing the activity in addition to what you read about the activity. So it's really nice, I think. And it's useful for all levels of teaching, not just university. I mean, John doesn't do kids, but you know, there are definitely ideas that you can take from it for teaching children. Okay, well, I'll go ahead and turn off the recording. And